All right, good evening, listeners. Welcome to Motley Crude, episode 13. I'm Kevin, and with me this evening, I've got Ryan. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. And we've also got Andrew, who's back. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Doing great, doing great. So, this evening for episode 13, we're going to be doing a bit of a catch-up episode. We'll be discussing the surprise FAQ that landed over the last week, as well as reviewing all of the news from LVO that was released on Thursday of this week. But before we get all to that stuff, let's start with a bit of a hobby roundtable to catch up on what we've been up to over the last few weeks. So I'll turn it over to Ryan to kick us off.
So I have headed out of town for work, so I haven't been doing much painting or anything, but I have gotten in at least 3 games since our last episode off the top of my head. A couple
Nice.
on Warhol, one in person here against a good friend of mine's orcs. So that'll be, that's been good. Just been throwing Bretonnian Errantry Crusade at stuff and fiddling around with the City of Nuln army.
Nice. This is your first time running Errantry Crusade, right?
Yes, I exclusively played Exiles for the last year, so it was quite interesting to suddenly have to play Bretonnians very differently, but it's a lateral change. It's an interesting. Your buffs just move to a different spot in your planning.
Sure. And are you liking Errantry Crusade, or how are you finding it compared to Exiles?
I'm really enjoying it, but obviously it's very much I charge you. My tactics are charge you and set up the next charge and keep charging you. But I'm really enjoying you catch people with just how far you can go with them, and some unique things like that frenzied unit of questing knights I threw at you before I came down here.
Yep.
It's just fun.
Yeah, for sure. So Andrew, what have you been up to hobby-wise?
Not too much hobby-wise. I've been on this crazy death march at work, working crazy hours, and usually when I get home, I'm too tired to really do anything. The few hours I have had to sort of steal away to my painting room, I've been still working on a bunch of old Necromunda terrain pieces I built probably over a year ago that's been sitting on my shelf, so I want to get those done. That's about it. I don't really have time to do much these days.
That's fine.
We did get Canhammer Team Tournament up and running though, so the tickets went on sale yesterday as of recording for that. Maybe that's something we could talk about in a future episode, but yeah, that's basically been my hobby, is getting the website updated and stuff.
Yeah, we are. So I'm signed up, and my team is signed up for the event. I'm really, really excited. I know that several others of our listeners are showing up to the event for sure. I think we have 3 local teams going as of right now. One out of Toronto, one out of Montreal, and forget where the other one's from. But yeah, I think it's gonna be great. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're currently at 6 out of 10 teams, so I mean, that's pretty exciting because we've only had tickets on sale for a day.
Yeah.
So hopefully we sell out. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, I'm there's a lot of time left to sell out. I'm just happy because once you hit 6 teams, you can have the full 5 rounds into different teams, and then you're basically golden from that point on, right? The rest is just gravy.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. On my end, so it's been a pretty busy few weeks hobby-wise. So I played 3 games also, much like Ryan. So I played into my buddy Brian's Bretonnians. That was a win. I played against Ryan, the game he mentioned, which ended up in a tie. We both brought some just fun lists to screw around, and it was it was a good time. I brought a bunch of Bull Centaurs, which I haven't run in a very long time, and really enjoyed it. And then I had, in my third game, I played the infamous Cleary, and I lost to his all cannons list that he's testing out for his dwarves.
Which I later massacred with Bretonnian Errantry Crusade.
Yeah. It's very much a skew list, right? And if you run into something that counters that skew, it's going to be a bit of a rough time for sure. My main issue is that all the armies that I play are armies that will do poorly into an all cannon spam. So there's that. I built a bunch of models for my Wolves of the Sea army over the last few weeks. I think I've got like half the army built. Done a lot of conversions on like Marauder Berserkers, converted up like a Marauder Shaman type caster character, not Archeon that looks like a Marauder 2, that kind of stuff. Done some painting. I'm almost done painting up just a Demon Smith that I had lying around for my Chaos Dwarves for like 10 years that I hadn't touched. So I just painted that guy up really quickly. I'm also continuing on my never-ending quest to read listen to every single Horus Heresy novel. I'm getting very close to the end. I'm currently on Titan Death, which is the Battle of Beta Garmin for those Horus Heresy fans that we may have in the audience. And then finally, to close it all off, I've signed up for an online Old World league, which is the Old World Legends sort of league / tournament that's happening. And it's turned out to be an absolute Shark's Tank of who's who of competitive Warhammer the Old World gaming. So that should be fun. I've got 2 members from my CHTT, my Canhammer Team Tournament team that are in the tournament also. So we'll be going through that gauntlet together. Good team building exercise there. So yeah, that's it for me from a hobby perspective. So let's move on to our first main topic for the evening, which is the FAQ. We're going to start by just discussing the overview, a bit of an overview, and then we'll talk about the core rules after. For our listeners out there, we're not going to be covering every single item that's listed in the FAQ. Turns out that a lot of it, from our perspective, is things that we were already sort of playing locally here, and that kind of align with us. And talking for a while and saying that we were already doing this, it makes sense to us, is probably not the most engaging podcast you're ever going to hear. So we're just going to pick some of the interesting bits to discuss. So before we kick off with looking at the individual rulings, let's start with something slightly more contentious. So Ryan, we got this surprise FAQ this week. What are your overall thoughts about the reception in the community, the response and the discourse that you've seen online about the FAQ, and why do you think it's had such emotional responses?
Okay, so I'm going to break this down to a few spots. Firstly, I'm actually very happy with a lot of what this addressed. I'm, equally disappointed with a lot of people that it didn't address certain other questions that I won't go into, but that kind of need answering, and we're literally just vibing on how to play them. But personally, I was quite happy to see things ruled the way they were, in most cases. Now, as to the community question, on the whole, I'm a little bit disappointed in the overall reaction because, at the end of the day, the author of the game, who presumably created this document, in the author of the game intended what they said or what they wrote. And so when they come out and tell you this is how it works, feeling personally offended by that just seems like a bit excessive. When at the end of the day, you have new information, you adapt to operate correctly, and you move on with your life. That's how I was always taught.
Yeah.
So that's all. Is I found that there was a lot of resistance and a lot of language shaping towards that balkanized game we had in the early 2000s with like 20 different formats. You never knew what game you were playing depending on what store you went into.
Yeah.
Um, and so I like, while I agree with the sentiment that something like an FAQ shouldn't be polarizing, I think a great many people were too caught up in their own ideas of what the rules should be to the point where they were ignoring the indications of what the rules are. And I guess a last point on like general communication in the whole rules as intended versus rules as written philosophical debate.
Yeah.
Until you're given evidence to the contrary, what someone puts in writing is what they intended to convey. If you don't believe that, then all human communication breaks down and
Yes.
society no longer exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's my soapbox.
Fair. Yeah, I guess on my end, like the first thing that I found strange with the FAQ is that it wasn't announced, marketed, or pushed in any way, shape, or form by GW. Like I just woke up one morning and my phone had gone off like 75 times on Discord and WhatsApp telling me that there was a surprise FAQ that was released, which is kind of strange when you consider that like for 40K and AOS, these things are heralded and they're announced quite vocally by GW. They've got articles on Warcom, all that kind of stuff. So that to me
It
was a
was
bit
a
of a
Facebook post 10 hours later.
Oh yeah, 10 hours later. All right. Fair. Sure. I take my whole argument back. No, but seriously, I thought that part was kind of weird. Overall, as I mentioned in my opening statements earlier, I'm quite happy with the changes in the FAQ, because they generally align with how we've been playing things locally here in Ottawa. I guess happy is not the right word. I'm more like generally unmoved because it kind of aligns with what we're doing and there's not a lot of big shaking the boat here. I don't quite understand the emotive response from the community on this one. Like people are presumably asking these questions of the game designers and they're getting answers, and as you said, Ryan, at that point you take the answer, you got new information, and you move on. You carry on with playing the game. For me, it's like, this is going to be a strange analogy, but it's a little bit like if people were raging at a law that was passed or something, right? Like a judgment in a court or something like this, because ultimately you have like zero control over these things. So I don't think it's something that you should be getting so emotionally, rocked by. And I guess my personal take is I try to focus on the things that I can directly impact. So, the games that I play, the hobby that I'm doing here in my basement, or how I engage about the hobby, rather than getting upset over whether or not impact hits can trigger through a low linear obstacle. Hint, they can't. So that's I guess that's my take on overall on the FAQ. What are your thoughts, Andrew?
Generally I'm happy with this. Warcom and not heralding this beforehand is kind of par for the course for a lot of old world anyway, so it's just that was like a whatever for me. But I am just happy that we're still seeing this game being supported, a year out at this point. I think in the beginning there was a lot of people who were saying, Old World's going to be like a one and done, not supported game. But clearly this is proof that that's not the case, so I'm happy about that. Generally, I try to stay out of a lot of the online groups and discourse, just because eventually I will respond, and it's usually me calling someone a jackass or something, so I just try not to read it. I have seen a few things though, and like honestly, I feel like a lot of the discourse comes from a place of people, like most likely old players, who have an idea in their head of what Warhammer Fantasy or the old world should be, and it doesn't, the reality of that situation doesn't reflect like what they think. So I think that's why we're seeing these sort of like over the top reactions to the FAQ. But like at least in our meta, it's kind of just par for the course for most of these things. So it's not like we're not seeing a lot of that from our group, but I think there's a lot of groups out there who either play the game differently or expect the game to be a different game. And that's kind of where you're seeing some of these like less than happy responses from people, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right, Andrew, on a lot of points there. You mentioned that is the game going to be one and done and not get any support? And I think you're completely right on that one. We've had, by my count, I think 4 FAQs this year. We are just about to get our 7th Arcane Journal released here over the next few weeks. We had a metric shit ton of kits that came back on sale for the game, and the game is just fun overall. So, for me, it's a like glass half full situation where there's just a lot of positive stuff to talk about as a community and be pumped about. We got a new army coming in, like all this kind of stuff. So, and then the other thing, Andrew, like I get that them not GW not championing that they're pushing out a new FAQ is not like a big surprise, but I think my issue with it is more along the lines of, if you don't publish, well, they did publish it, but if you don't vocalize that you're publishing something like this, there's a pretty significant section of the player base that is just not going to be able to see it. And then you're going to get some really weird situations in game where you're going to be like, oh yeah, but that can't be done. And the opposing player will just have no idea because they haven't seen those FAQs. So anyways, I think they should be vocalizing that a little bit more.
I mean, I agree. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be doing it. It's just, it's kind of how a lot of
unsurprising
communication. Yeah.
Sure.
Like it's how it's been. So I'm just like, whatever. It's how they've always been kind of treating this game as like an afterthought.
Fair.
But again, like, yeah, they should be doing more. It could have been advertised better beforehand or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. So I was going to ask you guys about what your overall thoughts on the FAQ, but I think we all covered it. So let's just push on and talk about the changes in the FAQ for the core rules. I'm going to start with Ryan. Can you take us over the first, I think, impactful change, which is the change to the crunch rule?
Yes. So crunch, bullet step 5 of the cannon fire rule, has been changed. Its second bullet point has been changed to if the path of the cannonball meets a hill, impassable terrain, or a high linear obstacle, it stops immediately, no further models are hit. So, for those unfamiliar with the cannon fire rule, you roll an artillery die. You pick a spot on the ground you want to aim at, you roll an artillery die. If you don't misfire, you move the dot in a straight line away from the cannon. The distance rolled on the artillery die, that becomes the strike point. You then roll a second artillery die. If you roll a misfire, the ball stops there. If you roll a number, the cannonball moves an additional 2 to 10 inches, and finally comes to a rest. Everything between the strike point and the location where the cannonball ends is potentially hit up to 1 model per rank or file, depending on if you're in the front side of a unit. So where this crunch impact is relevant is between the strike point and the final resting place of the cannonball. Just for absolute clarity, this does not mean that the strike point, like moving on to a hill, magically stops the cannonball from going further. It only impacts the cannonball from the strike point forward. So if what this means in things is once you've hit a spot with the strike spot, if that spot is on a hill or in impassable terrain or in a high linear obstacle, the cannonball literally can't go anywhere else. But if it is forward of that sort of thing, it'll move until it contacts it. So what this stops is people being able to shoot, to basically like bounce a cannonball off the top of a hill into unseen dead ground behind the hill or through a building or whatever. So now, like, you can bounce a shot onto a hill and then it just kind of stops immediately there. The curious thing about this is it actually now makes being on top of a hill one of the most defensible locations for or from cannons, because the cannon has to basically hit you directly uh, on top of the hill with the initial strike roll in order to hit you at all, which is kind of interesting. The other interesting part is this does not in any way address forests, which a lot of people seem to have an issue with the idea of cannons blindly shooting through forests, but that's still allowed as far as I can tell. So that's that.
Yeah, generally agreed with everything you said here. I think overall, sure is my response. Like, I find the situation where you're sitting on a hill and you can only be hit by like an absolute direct nail it on the head type hit from a cannon to feel a little bit gamey. But I'm not overly stressed about it. It feels like I guess from now on, hills are just cannon safe spaces, basically. I don't have much more on that one. What are your thoughts on this one, Andrew?
Yeah, like I'm not exactly sure how impactful this realistically will be. Sure, I guess it'll make like war machines trying to shoot war machines on an up opposing hill harder to do, but I don't know. I guess I'm gonna have to see it in play to have like an actual opinion other than like meh whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe this is like a big deal, but like I just don't see it being
Yeah,
that
sure.
much of a big
I
deal.
guess like the bottom line of it for me anyways is that hills are now, as Ryan mentioned, like defensive positions, whereas before they were used offensively to put your cannons so that they, or artillery pieces so that they could get line of sight over intervening models. So you were using them in that way, but now I guess if you get a hill that's positioned get quite forward in your deployment zone, you can really use it as a nice defensive anchor if your enemy is packing cannons. It becomes valuable from that perspective. But it is matchup dependent for sure.
Yeah. And like having, if it is as you like in your scenario where it is positioned forward and now it's like a more important piece of terrain on the board, like I only see that as a good thing because now it's like that's a point on the field where either you're going to be trying to defend or trying to push your opponent off. So it creates that sort of like dynamic gameplay you kind of want, as opposed to let's push at each other. It's more, how are we going to tackle this hill type idea, right? So
Don't tell
I think
people
that's
about
a
key
good thing.
terrain.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I don't know.
So for all my Chaos Dwarf brothers out there, when you're bringing Iron Demons to the game and the enemy's got cannons, you make sure you park those bad boys on a hill, and then your life suddenly becomes much easier. So
Are you sure about that though? Because the footprint of the train is pretty big, so you can still just be like, 4 from the back or 6 from the back, and like
no,
two of those guys.
because if the bouncing path crosses the hill at any point, then it's going to stop. So if you put
But
yourself,
that's
sorry,
the bounce.
But
yeah,
that's the
The
bounce.
strike can still be on you. So that's what I'm saying is if
Yeah,
you Andrew's
oh
right,
yeah,
if you
yeah,
go like
absolutely,
6 off the back,
oh sure, sure, sure,
as long as you don't roll like an 8,
yeah, yeah,
you're gonna hit it.
sure, but fine, as long as you have line of sight to that point behind the hill, right? Which you wouldn't because it's a hill.
No, but you're and we're not
that's
saying
line
aim
of sight to
behind
your
the hill.
model.
Your
Sure, sure.
iron demon's like almost 3 or 4 inches deep.
Yeah, sure,
Just
sure.
aim
Yeah,
just
you can
aim
move
at
the hit
it.
points on the base. Yeah,
Well, no, you can't move the hit point can move is the point we're making.
yeah.
Yes.
Yep, agreed. Still better than being in an open field. I think. I'll try to
Correct.
let you guys know. All right, so changes. I'll take the next one. That is changes to the Berserker Blade. Not hugely impactful, but I did throw it on here. So the Berserker Blade basically has lost the Frenzy rule, and that's been replaced with getting extra attacks +1 as well as Impetuous. So basically, you get the version of Frenzy where you don't lose Frenzy and you don't lose the benefits of the weapon is how I see this. Because, it's not a great magic weapon to start off with. And then if you lose its effects the first time you lose a combat, it's a bit of a, why am I taking this item? But now at least you get to keep the bonuses, and it sort of reduces the downside of Frenzy with Impetuous, where you're only having to charge half the time. What are your thoughts on this one, Andrew?
Again, it just seems... I can't even find the rule now. I just had it. Oh, here we go. It makes this weapon kind of worse. Because now you're taking away reliability of it, right? With the Impetuous?
I think you're adding reliability because you can't lose the extra attacks, right? Impetuous, you got to roll for, so sure, but Frenzy is like you can lose it, right?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. I mean, they're both not great for controlling your unit.
Agreed.
I just feel there's better ways to mitigate like Frenzy than Impetuous with like, blocking and stuff. And I guess Impetuous is the same way, but I think I'd still rather the Frenzy.
Sure. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
So I feel like this should have come with like a 5-point discount, but like for 20 points, I can have a Sword of Might or this.
Yeah, it's not a very good weapon.
But with that said, as a guy who's now playing an army that's like universally impetuous, being able to do things like slap this on a paladin with the virtue of the ideal, and now he's running around with 5 attacks at weapon skill 7 isn't the worst thing in the world, because he's impetuous already anyway. So like if you're putting this on something like a character on a goblin character on a wolf or whatever, where they're already impetuous, the impetuousness imposed by the weapon isn't an extra detriment.
Sure. Yeah, I guess in those situations, like just the weapon's profile is going to come back to bite you in the ass, because having no AP on it at all is not ideal, right? When you compare to great weapons.
Or the Sword of Might.
Or anything, basically. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on. Andrew, why don't you take the next one, which is on page 3, the changes to the range self aura spells no longer stacking.
Yeah, so this is in the FAQ section, not the errata. And the question was, casting the same enchantment or hex spells on a unit more than once has no further effect, but what about spells with a range of self that affect all units within a certain distance to the caster? The answer for that was, unless stated otherwise, such spells are not cumulative, and casting them multiple times will have no further effect.
Yeah. Any thoughts on this one?
I'm trying to think of the right words. Isn't this the same? I mean, there's already such a weird way in which like casting buff spells and stuff stacks. Like some things do, some things don't.
Yeah.
So, like, how many spells are there even that this would really change the effect of?
Yeah.
And like, how are you getting this many of the same spell cast anyway?
Yeah.
Like, it feels kind of like a nothing burger to me.
Yeah. So for me, it's they'd already previously talked about stacking spells, but these ones, like, it affects a few things off the top of my head. The first one, as a Chaos Dwarf player, that comes to mind is it's like a nerf, or it hits Storm of Ash, which is like the 9-inch bubble of -1 to hit that you can cast as a signature spell. So everybody can pick it, like all your casters can pick it up, and you could just stack -1s to hit. Not a lot of people were doing that. I personally wasn't doing that, but you can no longer do that. So that's like a bit of a hit, for instance, to that spell. And what I find kind of strange is that some other sources of auras still stack in the game. For instance, the Mortis engine is an example of something that still stacks and probably shouldn't. So yeah, I guess I'm not overly fussed about it because I wasn't running Calstoros like this, and there's a few other examples, but yeah, I mean it does impact, I'm sure, some players out there. What about you, Ryan?
I mean, anything to make double light of protection not be the worst thing in existence is just fine in my book.
I'm pretty sure they already FAQ'd that Caskets of Soul don't stack anymore, I believe.
Yes, but originally they just
yeah, originally they did. You're right.
It was their casting buff that didn't stack,
Oh, yeah,
not their
okay.
spells.
Fair.
Now the spells don't stack either.
Exactly. But the Mortis engine still does, for instance.
For some reason, yeah.
For some reason.
And it's funny because they don't even need an FAQ to fix that. They can literally just edit the PDF.
Exactly. Yes.
But yeah, like there's some weird edge cases with like double demonic vigor or whatever if you got real spicy, but it's fine. I would honestly prefer to have just seen a blanket rule on like either like just everything doesn't stack within reason, but like anything that comes from like a special ability or a spell or what have you.
Yeah, unless specifically mentioned, auras don't stack.
Exactly. Yeah. But not even auras, like stuff like the stupid necrotech nonsense.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, fair.
Or if they just had like wording where it was like multiple uses of the same spell or effect don't stack, but that doesn't mean spell or like skill doesn't stack, but the effects do if it's from different sources. So
yeah, basically if it has the same name, it can't stack.
Yeah, 100% that. So it's like if it's a different source or a different like ability, sure it can stack. But if it's like if you like in your example, if you're casting multiple hellish vigors, like that doesn't stack because it's you already have hellish vigor, right? Like you can't do it twice.
Yeah.
Or demonic vigor, sorry. Like I don't know. I think that would be a clearer and cleaner way to do it.
Yeah, agreed. Why don't you, Ryan? Why don't you bring us through the next one, which is the infamous impact hits on walls?
Question: my unit charges an enemy unit that's defending a low linear obstacle, making base contact with the obstacle rather than the unit. Can my unit make impact hits or stomp attacks? Answer: no. Models must be in base contact with the enemy to make impact hits or stomp attacks. So this one creates a can of worms if you think about any of the related things that come downrange from this answer. But ultimately, this means you're standing behind a wall, some chariots or whatever smash into the wall to charge you. Because specifically chariots, unless they're a steam tank or a war wagon or a few other things, can't actually cross the wall because it's impassable to them. It neuters the impact hits. So it provides a reasonable defensive buff for good defensive play, generally by infantry or whatever. So makes sense to me. Where it gets weird is the implication that if you're not in base contact and therefore cannot do these two things, can you do any of the other things that require you to be in base contact, such as make more than just supporting attacks or a whole bunch of other things? And I don't want to like derail the entire discussion with those rabbit holes. So at the end of the day, just take this answer for exactly what it says, and we'll just go there. It's fine.
Yeah, sure. for me, like I get that people were jumping on this as like a potential somehow nerf to dragons or large writable monsters. However, I don't think this is the nerf we're looking for, guys. Here, you've got to engineer a pretty unique situation for this to matter in your game. So you have to have a low linear obstacle that's placed in a place where you actually want to stand behind it. Then you have to get charged by a dragon in your front arc, and then dragons generally don't even have impact hits, but then it's going to lose its stomps after. So if you want to address the perceived problem around those kinds of models, there's other ways to do it rather than this one, frankly.
But even in that regard, the dragon can still choose to be on the low linear obstacle because it
flying,
becomes disrupted and doesn't care.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
And then it still stomps you.
Yeah, sure. But anyways, so like this is not what we're looking for, I guess is my point here. I think this answer sort of already aligns with how we were playing impact hits and stomps. So if, for instance, you have a unit that has impact hits that is much wider than its target, the models in that unit that were not in base contact with the opposing the enemy target obviously didn't get any impact hits previously, or that's how we played it anyways locally. So this kind of aligns with that in the sense that there is an air gap between you and the target because of the low linear obstacle. Therefore, you don't get impact hits, which is, to me, kind of makes sense. But maybe people were playing it a little bit differently elsewhere. What are your thoughts on this one, Andrew?
I actually like this. Again, I don't see it as some like big equalizer for dragons or chariots and stuff, but anything that sort of makes terrain more impactful on the gameplay, I think is a good thing. So now people are going to be maybe thinking of using low linear obstacles as a defensible position for their battle lines or, units they want to keep safe, as opposed to just kind of ignoring them, which is at least personally how I've seen things done in my games. So I think this is a good change just because, again, it brings more interaction with the table you're playing on as opposed to just focusing on the opponent's army.
Yep, agreed. And it's a little bit of an extra source of survivability for your infantry if you can line it up and make it work. So that's cool. Ryan, why don't you take us through the next one? Sorry.
Question: are units that deploy using the Scouts special rule counted when determining which player finished deploying their army first? Answer: yes. So, this was one of those questions that about a year ago, no one had an answer for. And so various parts of the community just kind of made a call because the question needed an answer. And the call was made in the opposite direction of how this was ruled. However, I kind of like the way it works now, which is that, having scouts is an advantage in your ability to like deploy and control and shape the battlefield. But now it could also, depending on how many scouts you have and whether your opponent has scouts and how many scouts they have, shape the modifier to your odds to go first. And it also leans into other things like, if you're Bretonians and you're going to just pray anyway, you don't care that you're putting 2 units of squires out as scouts because you don't care about losing that +1 modifier to go first. Whereas, maybe your city-state of Nuln that's trying to lean into +2 from Hans Lowenheck, maybe isn't going to take any scouts now because they might forfeit their ability to get that +2 modifier. So it just, I don't think it like makes the game better or worse in any way, but it certainly makes the like calculus of how you build lists and choose to deploy different. And it also means that +1 modifier is no longer just straight drops. It's based on sequencing of those drops as well.
Yeah, I agree with you here. I think it's probably the right call, and it makes things a little bit more dicey for armies that are packing a lot of scouting units. In terms of, it's no longer as easy to get the +1, basically. So yeah, I guess I'm supportive of this change. It just modifies how people deploy, and it brings things a little bit back on an even footing with regards to how you deploy and your drops and stuff like that. So I'm not too fussed by it. I like it. What are your thoughts, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm on the same boat. Like I use a lot of scouts, so now this is gonna make me think, well, do I really need that +1? Should I deploy this with my main force, or should I just continue to use my scouts? Like scouts is already like a pretty strong ability because it helps you dictate, army placement on the board. So having, before having a potential also +1 on top of that just kind of made it maybe a little too powerful. Um, I know, at least from the little bit I've seen from like the online discourse, this is one of those ones that gave people that sort of adverse reaction to this FAQ. And again, it goes back to my original point of I think those are old players because in previous editions, you still got the +1, like before the scouts were deployed. So now that this is going in opposite of how it was in like a previous edition, this is why we're seeing like sort of people, chafing against this new FAQ because this goes against, in their head how Warhammer Fantasy should be played. But for me, like I'm fine with this. Like I use a lot of scouts. I'm still probably going to use them. Like it's just a +1 to a die roll. Like you can. It's not that huge or game breaking. I don't think, at least.
Exactly. And you're like right now, scouts is all upside because it's a very powerful rule, and then B can really move the math on who goes first. So at least I think it balances things out a little bit, and it makes scouts a little bit more, reduces the power level just a fraction. So
yeah, 100%.
Okay, let's move on to the next one, which I'll throw back to you, Andrew. It's going to be the one about units that have succumbed to stupidity on page 8.
Yeah. Let me just bring up that one. I have read this one. Okay. When a unit that has succumbed to stupidity moves. Oh, that's the wrong one.
No, it is that one. It is that one.
No, it's the one after it.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Question: when I move a unit that has succumbed to stupidity, can I move it into base contact with an enemy unit? Answer: no. This is straight up the rules as written from the Old World book.
Yeah.
Because it is, what is it? Compulsory moves. So you couldn't move into base contact with a unit anyways in compulsory moves. So I don't know why people thought stupidity would allow you to. Other than, again, in previous editions, you could stupidity into a combat. This is how we've all played it locally. I have 2 stupid units in my Dark Elf list, the cold ones. This is how I've always played it. So this is a big nothing to me. This is just clarification on something we were already doing anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I had this situation come up with a Chaos Lord that became stupid in my game against Clary last week, and I didn't move him into contact. And that was before the FAQ. Like, my understanding was also that this is how it was played, basically. What are your thoughts on this one, Ryan?
I don't really have thoughts on this one. Like, It's fine. I just didn't care about the outcome. I think I've ran into stupidity exactly twice.
Sure. Okay, so maybe I take you on to one that is way more impactful, and that I'm sure you've run into quite a few times, and that's the change to Swift Stride. So the question is, when do you declare that you are using Swift Stride? And the answer is before making a charge, flee, or pursuit roll. This one is definitely a change to how it was written and also how it was played. It was a bit of and it impacts a lot of people. Actually, will impact all games basically. It impacts me personally and my army too. Yeah, I don't hate it. I don't hate the change. I guess it makes things you like it forces you to think as a player, which I like, because previously what you did obviously is you rolled your charge roll and then you looked at if it was good enough. Is more relevant for a flea or whatever there, but like you looked at your roll, if you were satisfied with that roll, you sort of just went with it, and then you had the Swift Stride as an extra insurance policy, which was really handy in situations where, for instance, you were close to the board edge and you didn't want to flee off the board. So you could, there was very little risk in saving the Swift Stride roll for later. Now it makes things a little bit more dicey, and it forces you to think and do a little bit of mental gymnastics to see where your unit can potentially end up. And I think critically, it also it's not a massive nerf to Swift Stride because Swift Stride is most impactful on charges where you're always going to use it. But I think it still is a little bit of a taking Swift Stride down a peg. So I'm generally happy with it because it is like one of the best rules in the game as far as I'm concerned. But what are your thoughts on this one? Let's start with Ryan.
I like it. I like that there's an increased element of risk to using Swift Stride now. I mean, I was effectively like every charge roll was 2 dice with a different colored die being rolled at the same time anyway,
Sure.
because why do I not want extra charge distance when I want to charge you?
Yeah.
And then I was really doing the same thing on overruns and flee rolls generally. I would just measure, make a gut check on making sure I'm not going to like run off the table
Yeah.
or run into something weird, and then usually just roll the dice together anyway. So
Yeah.
I was kind of already doing it, but I wasn't like imposing that on anyone else. I was letting people have discretion. But I like the fact that it's now this risk. So it's like, yes, you're fast, but now it's, you have to live with the consequences of having that rule and using it.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's much easier to make a call when you see the dice ahead of time, right? So, yeah.
Correct.
Okay, Andrew, what are your thoughts on this one?
I really like it. Again, like Ryan said, it makes you have to think now about using Swift Stride, and anything that sort of takes away the, I guess, point and click aspect of Swift Stride is a good thing. I feel that Swift Stride's kind of like that. It's such a strong rule, and it's such a change from like how previous editions were. Like there was nothing like Swift Stride before, and it's kind of become like this has become kind of the addition of Swift Stride.
Yeah.
So anything that like makes you have to think before using that ability now, I think is a good thing. Just to sort of temper the strength of it now. If you are having to flee from a combat, you need to see if you need to use that Swift Stride and risk maybe running off the board or not. Instead of just like rolling and being like, oh, well, I only rolled like a 6-inch flee, I should probably use that Swift Stride. Like at that point, it's too late. So you got to like now think of that risk when doing things like that. I think for charging, you're still just going to auto use it anyway because you want to go as far as possible regardless. But like for those times when you're falling back in good order or fleeing, now you're going to have to think tactically about if you want to use that ability or not. And I think that's just a good thing.
Agreed. Fully agreed. Cool. So we're all pretty much on board with this one. Here's another one that I think will impact a lot of people. Andrew, why don't you take us over the ARC issue for skirmishers, also on page 9.
Page 9. How does a unit of skirmishers form up when charged by 2 or more different no,
it's not that one, it's the next one.
The next one, fuck, I did it again. Do skirmishers have a flank or rear arcs while engaged in combat? The answer is no. This is, I think, somewhat different than how we played. I know we've kind of had some had some conscientious discussions in our like group Discord about, you know, what exactly happens to a skirmisher when it has to form up into a combat. I think this is good though, because now we finally have a definitive answer, and realistically, it kind of gives skirmishers a little bit of a buff while in combat now because they're not giving up those, you know, flanks or rear arcs if they got multi-charged, which I think is good.
Agreed.
Other than that, like, I don't really have any strong opinions on this one way or another. We don't, at least in our meta, I don't see a lot of skirmishers, or if we do, it's like very small sort of scouty units or like, you know, chaff stuff. But yeah, I think this is good, and it was a clarification that was needed, so it's good that they finally came out and, you know, cleaned up some of those skirmisher rules a bit with this. There's more work to be done, obviously, but this is a good step in the right direction.
Sure. Yeah, sure. I actually think this is kind of an impactful one. Like, I certainly was not playing it this way. I was playing it that once the skirmishers were in combat, they had a flank and a rear to charge. So it does change that. I wasn't super emotionally invested into that interpretation. So now, you know, skirmishers no longer have arcs, even when they're in combat. I guess presumably the guys are watching their behind and sides while they're fighting somebody in a life and death situation. So I can live with that ludonarrative dissonance issue. I think it is going to be kind of impactful. You're seeing more and more, I think, Death Star type units, and I think the ones that have the skirmisher rules are especially potent. So, for instance, obvious Peg Knights is a great example. You can also make a Death Star out of Skin Wolves, for instance, that would be impacted by this rule. So, I think it generally is a small, very small buff to units of skirmishers because they no longer are giving up extra combat res on their flanks and rears. So there is that, but I'm not overly worried by it overall. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
So this is a funny one for me because referring back to that early Discord discussion about how the rules worked.
Yeah.
I actually already believed this was the case, and I had so many people yell at me that I just gave up.
Sure.
Because of one badly written sentence, but like
mob rule.
Yeah, but it was one of those things where like skirmishers never stop being in skirmish formation, even when they're in combat. The close formation that they adopt is lowercase. It's not proper noun. So therefore, the majority of the rules for skirmishing, other than the ones that are specifically overwritten in combat, would still apply, at which point they have a 360-degree front arc. Yep. Anyway, just cool. It now works the way I originally thought it did. Great.
Yeah, and like it makes the after combat more like less clunky than if you were playing it where they had arcs, because you know before you were left with a situation where the combat ended and then your skirmishers were all still stuck together, and I get that they'll physically still be together now, but at least now you know that sure they're close together, but they still get all of the benefits of being skirmishers, right? And there's none of that clunky. How do I move them out again? You know.
Exactly. So like it works, it's fine, and like honestly, if you're like +1 combat res for flanking a unit of Peg Knights is not how you were beating the unit of Peg Knights.
No, it's not. It's not.
You were beating them with death.
Yeah. With things that can kill Peg Knights, not with +1 combat res. Okay, let's move on to the next one. I'm going to pass the ball to you, Ryan, on this one because I know you're quite invested in the answer to this. The interaction between Inspiring Presence and leadership modifiers.
So, if a unit is subject to any leadership modifiers, uses the General's Inspiring Presence rule, or any other rule that allows a unit to use the leadership of a nearby character, does the unit ignore these modifiers? Answer: no, the modifiers will still apply. For example, if a unit loses a round of combat to an enemy that causes terror, the -1 modifier to leadership caused by terror applies to whichever leadership characteristic the unit makes its break test against, be that its own or that of a nearby character. So, one, this is technically a question that was already answered, and they've now just expanded the scope of the answer to include any rule that allows you to substitute leadership.
Yeah.
So this now covers off on the High Elf, the free one.
Peer of Heart or something.
There we go.
Noble Heart,
and it also impacts the peasantry rule for units that aren't levies, which is a very specifically narrow situation where like yeoman guard and squires can now use nearby knights leadership. Interestingly, but so that's a whole thing. But the answer, like, is again circling back to it's the opposite of what it was ruled in 8th edition, and it is exactly how I thought it worked a year ago when the game came out. Which is that, you take the leadership value and then you modify it with these situational modifiers relevant to the unit using the leadership value. Now, I will address an additional question. Yes, they have not answered the question of what do you do with if the general or other character is suffering leadership modifiers before transposing them. I'm going to go out on a limb from my understanding of how modifying characteristics works, which is that they effectively increase or decrease in value and are set to a new value while subject to the modifier. I'm going to say if they ever do FAQ that question, 99% chance it's going to be if your general is subject to a -2 penalty and he's leadership 9, your unit is only gaining leadership 7 because his leadership is actually 7 while he's subject to the modifier.
Yeah.
But we'll see how that plays out in the future.
Yeah, and if you have several modifiers both on the unit and on the general, they wouldn't stack because you're substituting your leadership value for the one in the general, right?
Right. So you would take the general's modified leadership value, and then you would take any unit-specific leadership values and degenerate further. Because this also works the other way. This also means that if you have a general, or that ancillary question does matter, because, for example, if you have a general with warband in a big unit, like a goblin, for example, technically you could project that higher leadership value from those modifiers as well. So that is a question that definitely needs to be addressed and is a big chunk of like gray space right now, but I'm fairly certain that that's the way it's eventually going to be ruled. But the original question, I'm quite happy they expanded the scope, so now there's no loopholes for it's like Inspiring Presence, but it's not.
Yeah, I hadn't even considered the loophole issue, and that's super interesting. So I guess High Elf players are going to be a little bit upset about this one, but that is super interesting. I'll need to look a little bit more at like the second order effects of how other rules are impacted. But what are your thoughts on this one, Andrew?
I mean, I think this is how we played it anyway here. I know another big tournament locally did it differently, but this is again just whatever. Yeah, just clarifies what we've already been doing, right?
Yep, agreed. I think on my end, I don't have much more to add. Like Ryan, you covered it in a lot of detail there, and you actually gave me some things to think about. So thanks on that one. I think we'll just move on to the next one, which is Spectral Doppelganger. Andrew, page 12 for this one.
Yeah, so how does the Spectral Doppelganger spell interact with weapons that have either strikes first or strikes last special rule? The answer to that is the spell is cast at the wizard's initiative, meaning attacks generated by the spell are made at the wizard's initiative. However, if the casting wizard wishes to use a weapon with a strikes last special rule, those attacks are made at initiative 1. So, I have seen a lot of online arguing about what this sentence means, and it has muddied my initial reading of this, because my initial reading just made me think that, okay, if my wizard has a great weapon with strikes last, if I wish to use Spectral Doppelganger, I'm casting it at initiative step 1.
Yeah.
But I've seen people trying to argue that, well, you cast it at the wizard's initiative, whatever his base initiative is, let's say it's a 4.
Yeah.
But then the spell doesn't actually, the attacks from the spell don't actually happen until initiative step 1, which doesn't make sense to me. And then that also creates a weird spot where you might cast the spell, the wizard dies, then what happens to those attacks that would be happening at initiative 1. But like looking at it, I still think it's the original way I originally read it, which is if I'm casting Spectral Doppelganger with a great weapon, I'm casting that at initiative step 1 because that's the weapon attacks that I'm going to be using. What do you guys think? Because I may be wrong there.
Yeah, I think so that the spell is cast at the wizard's initiative, but then the attacks generated with the strikes last rule happen after, is how I'm reading this. Definitely. So if you use the great weapon example, you would cast your spell at initiative 4, and then you would only resolve the attacks later. And I guess if you die between those two steps, you just wouldn't get to do the attacks. But the other thought that I had is there's a bit of a strange situation here where using Spectral Doppelganger with spells that weapons that have strikes first is kind of a weird one, because if you're at initiative 3 and you cast Spectral Doppelganger and the weapon you use has strikes first, the strikes first portion of the initiative step ladder is already gone at that point. So I guess you would resolve your attacks right then and there because there's no other time to do them. But there's a bit of a strange one for me. What are your thoughts on this, Ryan? I think this raises a few questions for sure.
I actually don't have a huge issue with this one. Again, circling back to debates I had with a certain Tomb Kings player here, where I kind of I was 75% on to how this was going, was because you cast the spell, which assailments are cast at the wizard's initiative.
Yeah.
And then it says it uses the special rules of the caster and any weapon that they're carrying.
Yeah.
So I get they needed to clarify this piece because it got kind of weird of okay, well, I'm casting it at my initiative, it's the effect at my initiative. But no, I also definitely read it the same way as you. It very clearly states you cast the spell, you roll the dice to cast the spell at the wizard's initiative. However, if the weapon has strikes last, the effect doesn't occur until initiative 1.
Yeah.
The question that pulls out of that is there's two answers, and both of them are legitimate until we have evidence to otherwise. Is either if the wizard dies before initiative 1, those attacks never happen. But you could also make the argument that because he already cast the spell, he dies, and then the attacks still occur at initiative 1. But because the initiative sequencing still means other units will get to be alive and attack and things like that, because he did already cast the spell.
Yeah.
So I could see that one going either way, but it does need to be answered. Aside from that, I don't really have an issue. I can't remember if it was you or if it was someone else that I had a fairly lengthy discussion about the strikes first part, where given the way they've ruled it, strikes first is irrelevant unless the model has strikes first. If the model has strikes first,
then he can cast
they
an
normally
initiative
attack at initiative 10, and they can cast it then. But if the weapon has strikes first, time flows linearly, so too bad.
Yeah, it's too late. It doesn't work.
Yeah. Plus, he still gets to attack with the weapon.
Yeah.
So he's gonna get to attack with his 2 attacks at
strikes first.
10.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, agreed.
So, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's I think that's kind of an interesting one. We were not really playing it that way, or I wasn't playing it that way. So yeah, I stand corrected. We'll do it at initiative. I will cast an initiative and then we'll do the attacks at strikes last. Okay, so let's move on to the lore familiar, nerf, I'm going to call it, which is an interesting one for sure. So the question was, can a wizard with a lore familiar choose one of their faction's signature spells instead of the signature spell of their chosen lore? And the answer to that is no. So first things first, that is how it was written in the rule book originally. So they're just sort of reinforcing what was written from the get-go. But locally, and I think just broadly in the community, it was not played that way. A lot of people, I've been guilty of it in the past. I've been done to me more times that I can count, that people would just both have a lore familiar and choose one of their faction spells. That's no longer on the table now. So so the rules designers are bringing us back in line with the book, and I'm fine with that. I have no issues. It forces me to rethink a little bit how I employ my source of profits in Chaos Dwarves, for example, but it's something I'll be able to work my way through. I am confident, but it does at least make, I think the good aspect to this is it makes the lore familiar not so much of an auto take item on your level 4 casters. If you happen to be in a faction that has a strong set of signature spells, so you Empire players won't be too fussed by this, for instance. But I mean, for some of the other factions, there it'll be, like you're never going to see lore familiars and ogres anymore, for instance. Is sort of what that boils down to. What are your thoughts on this one, Ryan?
So, I feel like a bit of a
broken record,
record, but this is exactly how I said it worked, and then literally everyone told me to fuck off, and that I was wrong. And it turns out this is exactly how it works. So cool. It works the way I thought it does. It causes hard choices. Hard choices are good for games of tactics.
Agreed.
So that's the thing. There are some knock-on effects. Like if this is true, then also something like the Grimoire of Ogvald would prevent you from taking a faction signature spell as well. Mm-hmm. However, that's not explicitly stated yet, but it uses the exact same wording as the lore familiar in terms of not randomly generating spells. So,
yeah. So no, it's I agree with you. It makes ultimately, like, I think lore familiar was easily one of the top, I don't know, 10, maybe top 5 items in the game. So just bringing it down a little bit, I think is just good in general. So I'm happy with that. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
I too am guilty of taking lore familiar and faction signatures, but I am fine with this change. I think we've stated before that lore familiar was too cheap for what it did.
Yeah.
So this just kind of makes it now less auto take, as you said. It makes you have to think about how you use it, and maybe it will be a little bit less auto take if people are pining for those faction specific signature spells. So I think this is a good change. And yeah, anything that sort of makes things less auto take and seeing it and homogenizing armies, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. What are you going to do on the Dark Elf side? Are you going to drop the lore familiar to keep using your faction spell, or is it more important for you to pick the, I guess, battle magic spells that you want?
Pick the battle magic spells that I want.
So lore familiar.
Yeah, like the faction spell was like just kind of like, I don't really know what else to take. I'll just take the lore.
Sure.
So this is less of an impact for me, although I can see some armies being like, oh, this really stings, but for me it's kind of like a nothing.
Yeah, I think, like, for instance, I mentioned ogres. You're still going to want to take that regen save spell. Was it Troll Guts? I think it's called. The Wood Elves, you're still going to want to cast Tree Singing, for instance, so you're not going to see the lore familiar. Chaos Dwarves, I think there's a really strong argument to be made for still wanting to have Storm of Ash. I'm now leaning. It's changed my build basically on the caster because I want to include that spell. So I've dropped the lore familiar. So at least it brings some more thought into list design and stuff. So it's just generally positive. Okay, so that covers everything we wanted to touch on the core rules. Let's go to Forces of Fantasy. There's fewer things in this one, I think, that are super impactful. I'm going to kick off the first one here, and that's the one I think everybody has been talking about. It's the Sisters of the Thorn nerf. So we're changing here the Daughters of Eternity. We are changing 2 rules. So the first one is Daughters of Eternity is being changed, so that essentially the 4-up ward save is no longer applicable to characters that have joined a Sisters of the Thorn unit, which cool, I'm happy with, or not too worried about in either way, frankly. And then secondly, the one which actually is a really big deal is Deepwood Covens has been changed, and that was the rule that allowed previously the Sisters of the Thorn to select a spell from either battle magic or elementalism. What you saw all the time in Wood Elves lists was, at least at the competitive level, was 3 units of Sisters of the Thorn, all selecting Pillar of Flame as their spell, and then all just dropping that template, and then fleeing or leaving moving backwards away from out of dispel range, essentially, and then just having 3 to 4 pillars of fire just running around your army for the entire game. So that was an unfun thing to play against, and a very difficult thing to interact with. So I guess from that perspective, I'm glad with how it's been changed. On the other hand, it really, I think, makes the unit, which was a staple in Wood Elf lists, be more or less of a I just think it's too much of a nerf on that unit. Ideally, I think the better solution would have been to say you can still pick your spells, but you cannot pick the same spell more than once, for instance, which would have still, let Sisters of the Thorn be, I think, playable at a competitive level, because at the very least, you could take 1 unit of Sisters and then just get the spell you wanted, which would reduce the output significantly, but then still let you play with your toys. Because, there's some spells that if you roll into with Sisters, it's just not ideal for to have a unit that's going to cost you, I don't know, around 175 points be essentially useless because you brought them for a spell and they sort of shit the bed on that one. So yeah, I guess that's my take on it. It's rough to be a Wood Elf player today, so hard out for you guys. But it did need a nerf. What are your thoughts, Andrew?
A, fuck Wood Elf players. And B, I agree. I think they needed some sort of reining in, but this is a little much. Because as you said, you can bring this unit, and if you roll a bad spell, they're basically useless. It's basically just dead points, or you're going to just throw them away as chaff because they're not going to really have any major impactful, impact on the game, which is unfortunate. And I mean, it's weird because there's another unit like this in the game, although it is a legacy one, which is the Warlocks, and they can still pick their spell.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. They could have done this in a less, I guess, damaging way to that unit, because I don't think we're going to see very many of them on the battlefield anymore.
Yeah, and I think beyond that, Andrew, it has a massive impact on list design, and I think even competitiveness for the Wood Elf faction. We discussed this at length when we were talking about Wood Elves in our how strong the different factions are, internal and external balance episode. I think Wood Elves is a faction that has some pretty poor internal balance, and you sort of were left with a situation where it was like a 3-legged stool in terms of army design, where you had your on the one hand your dragon, or sometimes stag, Glade Lord, I think it's called, with which was the first, the hammer in the list. Then you had your ballistic skill shooting, usually from Deepwood Scouts with poison, which was your second, most efficient part of the army in terms of list design. And then your third leg to that stool was the Sisters of the Thorn, which with the Pillars of Fire usually, which were a massive portion of the offensive output of the army. So I think now that we've removed that, and we haven't given them anything else yet, it significantly reduces how strong that faction is, and really impacts how they're going to be designing their lists. I think it's actually probably it is faction specific, but probably the most impactful change in the FAQ. Frankly, what are your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, like overall, this is definitely one of the only things that stood out to me as like a deliberate errata to nerf a thing.
Yeah.
I don't have as much of a problem with it, um, because I don't really care. But it's just one of those like the unit can like looking at all the rules the unit has,
Yeah.
it can still do the thing that it like. The rules designers did not create a 140-point pillar of fire spamming machine. Like they created a unit that has a defined tactical purpose, and it does the same job as my mounted yeoman for less than or for roughly 15 points more, but with magic
Mhm.
as well. So like it's not like it no longer has any purpose. It just no longer has the purpose people like the ancillary purpose people were using it for. And if the only thing keeping Wood Elves like top tier competitive was 4 pillars of fire, then they like I totally agree Wood Elves just need to be tweaked in some way.
Yeah.
But like keeping the unfun, uninteractive mechanic just for the sake of that is also not healthy for the overall game.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
Um,
Yeah. I think the easier thing would have been to just handle Pillars of Fire directly in a better way, because let's be honest, this is a Pillars of Fire nerf through like another name, rather than like nobody's too worried about Sisters of the Thorn picking Plague of Rust 3 times, for instance. So
yeah.
yeah. Anyways, okay. I think we've talked about this one enough. Ryan, why don't you take us through the Bretonnian change, or not change, to the Green Knight and where he can spawn from?
So, Guardian of the Sacred Sites, change third sentence, second paragraph to it does not include magical vortexes, open ground, or hills, or any constructions such as walls or buildings. So this is with reference to where the Green Knight can arrive from, which was defined. It just said natural terrain, and then it just said like
Yeah.
brackets, forests, comma, difficult or dangerous terrain.
Yeah.
And so this further clarifies it. Like, I know way early on in the edition, we made a gut call. And we're like, okay, well, what says a hill is not a natural feature? And then we had the Green Knight. We didn't have the Green Knight spawning out of hills too many times, but other events made the same call. And then, apparently the Green Knight apocalypse occurred.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so this is a good clarification that, the Green Knight is not spawning out of a tree singing forest.
Yeah.
The Green Knight is not spawning out of a pillar of fire.
Which is an amazing mental image.
He's not popping up out of a hill.
Yeah.
He's not so he's popping up out of like crop fields and forests exclusively, as makes sense for the ghostly avatar of some kind of wood elf moon goddess. So there's
Sure.
that.
Yeah. I think, before I'll let Andrew go first.
Yeah, I mean, it's good that they clarified things. I don't think this is a huge change or like game changing thing, so it is what it is.
Yeah, I think most of our Bretonnian players locally are not super hard on the Green Knights, so we tended to see it maybe a little bit less. Like in my games, at least in the past, I just read the first portion of that rule and I was like, natural features, cool. My opponent can spawn out of the hill, so that's happened to me. But I guess I guess he can't anymore. So great. I guess I'm for it. I'm not too fussed either way. I find when you said open terrain, Ryan, I was like, open ground. I was like, okay, that includes hills because hills are considered open ground. But then it said hills, so I was like, oh, you mean people were trying to spawn the Green Knight out of the grass essentially in the open ground, which is a bit of a dick move that's no longer allowed. So there is that on this one. Okay.
I've got
Yeah.
one other thing here.
Yeah.
So we were very incredulous about the questing knight unit size being changed to 3. Plus, I've figured out why they did that.
Sure.
They're
Go ahead.
sold in boxes of 3 models.
Oh, okay.
That's why they did that.
That is a this is a form over function situation.
Exactly. Yeah. They're still bad.
Okay.
They just come in 3s now.
Can your okay, fine, cool. They come in 3s. Questing Knights, great. Okay, let's move on to Ravening Hordes. So Andrew, why don't you take the first, I think, impactful one on this one, and that's Skin Wolves getting fear.
This is good. It makes sense. They're fucking werewolves. They should cause fear. But it also helps with a lot of helping them mitigate like terror causing units against them and stuff like that. So I think that's pretty good. I don't know if you're ever gonna see them take advantage of outnumbering an enemy and causing them to flee due to fear. But just bringing them in line with like other monsters and monstrous creatures and stuff, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, it was probably a bit of an omission on that one for sure. Yeah, and what are your thoughts on this one, Ryan?
I mean, it's cool. Like, I'm not. Them getting fear makes sense. It's a rule they should totally have.
Yeah.
My interactions with fear in the game have generally been we roll extra dice and it's completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
So that's the whole thing. I also like that they corrected the base size and made the Skinwolf Jarl a champion. I didn't even notice that it wasn't.
Yeah, I think you see the champion upgrade and then you just assume everybody just
the champion.
Yeah.
So anyway, but it's nice that they have it. And Andrew, I think you might be surprised on how quickly you can outnumber something when your unit strength 3 per model.
Yeah, I think it just gives a bit of a bump, like a tiny bump to a big Death Star unit of Skin Wolves. Unfortunately, I tried to look at it, Ryan, because the in Wolves of the Sea there's a banner that changes fear to terror. There's not really any way to put your BSB on a demonic mount and join them in the unit to give them terror. So that's unfortunate. But yeah, so cool. Okay, let's move on to the
join it.
No, because they have the clumsy rule. So if you are not a monstrous cav or monstrous infantry, then you can't join it. So okay, next one is I think a cool one for our orc and goblin fans out there. It's with regards to the big guns special rule. So or upgrade, I should say. If I upgrade a unit of boar boys to have big guns, do their war boars benefit as well? And the answer to that is yes. So that is, I guess that makes sense narratively. Big orcs need big boars basically to carry them, but I think it's cool that it applies to the boars also, and it just gives you a little bit of extra offensive output. I think you're gonna especially see this in Nomadic Wa, which is probably an army of infamy that needs a little bit of help because you can take a unit of boar boys in core in that army, which is fantastic. The rest of their core kind of sucks, but it's fantastic that you can slap a big unit of boar boys in there, take a big chunk of core points, and give a nice upgrade to the boars at the same time. What are your thoughts, Andrew?
This is a nothing for me. Like, makes sense. That's cool. It's nice to see, like you said, that list get a little bit of help. Because I don't think we're seeing too much Nomadic Waz yet. But I don't know. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, I think we have Carl locally that plays a shit ton of boar boys in Nomadic Wa. That's the only time I've really seen it. Shout out to Carl.
Shout out to Carl.
Ryan, what are your thoughts? I think you're muted there, Ryan. Okay, I guess we'll just skip.
Thoughts, Ryan.
Yeah, that's good. We'll skip, and the next person was going to be Ryan again, so I'll jump in on this one until he's back. So the Casket of Souls thing. So let me just bring that one up. So essentially, can a Casket of Souls move at the end of the shooting phase of its turn using the reserve move special rule? in brackets, should it have it? And then the answer is yes. Whilst a Casket of Souls is an immovable object, this special rule clearly states that it prevents the model moving during the remaining moves subphase. It does not prevent movement at any other times or during other phases. I'm not sure I super like this one. I know that that's how it was being played, but it seems as strange to me cognitively that an immovable object could reserve move. But fine. I mean, that's already what was happening. I guess it's now enshrined into quote unquote law that Caskets of Souls can use reserve moves now. Fine. I mean, they're not going very far anyways, so whatever. That is what it is. Any thoughts on this one, Andrew?
I mean, it's how it was played locally. I'm kind of against it though too. Like, it's already a very powerful piece. It didn't really need a buff like this.
No.
Or at least codifying the buff that it may or may not have had. Again, though, it's not. I don't think it's like crazy big, but it is kind of, I don't know, lame.
Yeah, fair.
That's kind of basically my thoughts. Like, yeah, it sucks, but it is what it is. Like, I don't think it's like super game changing, but it didn't really need it doesn't need the help.
No, it doesn't. You're right. It certainly doesn't.
You guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Cool.
Any thoughts on that one, Ryan?
This is a weird one where like the name of the rule is biasing my perception of the ruling. But I guess the kind of like knock on thing is like, if this is the case and immovable object is specific to the inability to move in the remaining moves subphase, it also kind of creates some like weird things where like if you make a Casket of Souls stupid, it can move in the compulsory movement subphase now.
Amazing.
For example,
random moves if you could give it.
I cannot travel mystical pathways my trebuchet because that would be in the remaining move subphase and it cannot move.
Fair.
So, okay, like it's internally consistent. It's just kind of odd. And like even thematically, I don't understand how it's moving other than just magic bullshit. Go.
Yeah. And I don't think reserve move as like how the rule is sold is magic bullshit. Let's go. It's these are nimble units that can once they've fired their weapons, run off into the distance.
No,
like
but the only way that a Casket of Souls gets reserve move
is through a
from
spell. Yeah, tracking.
That's it.
Okay, cool. So that I think that wraps us up for the FAQ stuff. Let's move on. So this was the crunchy aspect of the episode. Let's move on to the hype aspect of the episode, and let's discuss the news from LVO and Warhammer community, because not everything that was posted was discussed at LVO. Strange, I know, but that's the way it is. Let's kick off with Andrew. What are your overall thoughts on the previews? Like, are you excited? Did anything catch your eye? Like, what's your hot take on all these previews?
I think it's good. It's nice to see a lot of these old kits coming back again. There's a lot of nostalgia there. I don't think there was too much that was announced other than something we'll mention at the end that was like out of left field. We kind of know what's left on the docket to be released. We knew High Elves were probably next to begin with, so it's nice to see all that stuff being announced and actually seeing the models that are coming back. I know there was a bit of speculation on whether we would be getting stuff like the Island of Blood kits or having to go with like the super old 6th Ed, like Sword Masters and shit like that. So it's cool to see that they're actually going full on with like the plastics from Island of Blood, because those are 6 Sword Master models.
Agreed.
And the new stuff they announced too is pretty cool, like that new Charis Prince.
Yeah, crazy.
And the even though Beastmen's clearly farther down the docket, we got a little bit of love for them too, which is pretty sweet. So yeah, overall, I think it was actually a really decent preview, and it was better than the last one where they just showed like, what was it, the timeline one where
but they showed all the Empire list also, right, on the last one.
Did they?
No,
Or
that was an
maybe I'm
article
thinking,
a couple days later.
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Okay.
it was the one with like the weird timeline that like didn't make sense, and dwarfs were still
Oh,
on it
yeah.
even though they had already been released. Like that was just like a huge bummer.
Yeah.
This one was like a complete 360 of like the disappointment of that to like they had a lot to show on this. There was a lot of old world love.
Yeah.
And you know, even the AOS releases, as we'll discuss, are probably pretty good for this as well. So yeah, I think it was awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd completely forgotten about Timeline Gate, but that was in fact a massive disappointment. So you're right. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
I thought it was really cool. I don't know a whole heck of a lot about High Elves, so it was just nice. Like they have very nice looking models. I like the two new characters that are coming out.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was nice to just get a comprehensive look at what they were getting. And it also generally these sorts of previews imply, aside from the time we saw dwarves, that we should be getting this within like 2 to 3 months.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed.
No,
Yeah. And
May
what a
release, called
far.
it.
Sorry. Go ahead, Andrew.
I said no, May release. I called it here.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, I think it's such a radical change of pace between dwarves and like that massive gap between dwarves and Warriors of Chaos to everything that's happened since Warriors of Chaos. It's it's super great, and I'm thankful for it. On my end, I'm super excited. I love the preview. I think it was probably the best old world preview that we've had since the game is launched. So I know it's AOS, but the Soulblight Gravelord models, i.e., the not vampire counts models that were released, I think are amazing. An upgrade to the Black Knight kit, White Lords is sick. Some cool looking Graveguard, like that's all fantastic news. If you're a Vampire Counts player, won't go into too much detail. We'll talk about it later. I think on the High Elf side, like I'm super happy with the High Elf preview. I think they got the most information about their armies of infamy of any of the factions released so far at the initial preview. So I'm super happy with that too. I'm spoiling our later portion of this segment, but like Cathay, let's go. Let's bring some new model lines into the game. I'm incredibly pumped for that too. And then Beastmen, Beastmen get a cool new character. So we're even going beyond the next Arcane Journal. So yeah, I'm super. I couldn't be happier. This is well, I presumably could be in some way there, but like I'm in general super happy with this preview. Ryan, do you want to? Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
In retrospect, like overall, even outside of like the old world sphere, this is probably one of the better previews they've had in ages. Like,
agreed.
They showed off new Necromunda stuff. They showed off a whole new faction for 40k that looks fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Like they just touched on like almost all their product lines, and like everything they showed was a fucking banger for this. Like it was a great preview.
Yeah,
It was
the
a great
Emperor's
way to
Children
start
are
the year.
sick. Yeah. I love the Emperor's Children line. It's great. Yeah, you're right, Andrew. And you know what was also cool? Also, is that let's say you're a Horus Heresy fan and they didn't have anything lined up for you. Well, still they had after that on the Warcom page a small preview for the Horus Heresy with that new, I forget the name of the big stompy robot that the Mechanicum is getting. So yeah,
I think it's
just
the Thanatar.
Yeah, something like that. Anyways, the not dreadnought that the Mechanicum is getting.
I do love that robot.
Yeah, it looks great. Looks great. Emperor's Children, as I mentioned, look sick. Yeah, it's all good stuff. Ryan, want to take us through some of the stuff that's coming back from High Elves?
Yeah, so we're getting a battalion box with 32 spearmen, 32 archers, and 2 chariots that can be built as either Tyrannok or Lion chariots.
Yeah,
it's going to be sweet. We're getting 2 characters. I don't know if we want to talk about those separately. Those are new guys.
Yeah, we'll talk about them later. Yeah.
Yeah. We're getting resculpted Illyrian Reavers or like remastered Illyrian Reavers is probably a better way to describe it. So those are cool, very dynamic looking.
Yeah.
We've got the Moon / Star Dragon Lord Mage Dragon Mage kit with the tiny little baby dragon and big dragon. We've got the plastic phoenixes coming back. And then we've got a variety of like a BSB and a Lord and mages on floaty rocks and on a horse, and the Lore Master of Hoeth that is possibly one of the coolest infantry models I've ever seen in my life. Just throwing a ball of magic while preparing to stab someone. I love that guy. And then we've got our Phoenix Guard and Sea Guard and Silver Helms and Dragon Princes, archers, spearmen, the combo kit of Shadow Stalkers and Sisters of Avalorn, White Lions. Those are the guys with axes, right? Yeah, White Lions.
Yeah.
And then Sword Masters, which, depending on who you talk to, it also appears like some of these in the disentangling of the Island of Blood kit looks like they got new command model options across a bunch of things that may have
the
not existed
Reavers
before.
definitely did.
Yeah, because they were landing on a different sprue that was for a different unit in the kit. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
and then we've got the two types of chariots returning. We've got the ballistae or the bolt throwers, whatever. Just use the Lumineth ones. They look so much better.
Yeah.
And the Lothern Skycutter bird chariot.
Bird chariot, amazing. Yeah.
And then we have, of course, the Handmaiden of the Everqueen and the guy who was already leaked with the lion coming back.
Core Hill. Yeah.
There we go. So yes, that's all of the stuff.
Yeah. I guess overall, I'm super happy with what's coming back. Like I not the most massive High Elf fan in the world, but like I'm just always floored by, I've been used to well, we have a great example of in this case Emperor's Children coming out as a new army on the 40k side, and they get like 6 or 8 kits maybe, and then you see, and I know that they're bringing back old sculpts, like I get it, but the amount of stuff that shows up with these releases is always like is a bit like shocking and awesome, I find. So I'm super happy on that front. There was a lot of information given about the 2 Armies of Infamy, which I also really enjoyed getting a preview of. So you wouldn't have seen this if you read the article and you didn't listen to the actual presentation. But I think Nick is his name, the presenter. He said, so the 2 Armies of Infamy will be a Sea Guard garrison, and then the Cracian Warhost. And he even mentioned some of the units that were coming, like specific units to those 2 Armies of Infamy. So, you have Ishaya Vess, she's called, as like sort of a leader character for that Seaguar garrison. He also mentioned a ship's company coming up as a playable unit in that Army of Infamy. Well, I assume in that Army of Infamy because it makes sense. And it's a unit that had rules previously, I think in 6th Ed. Local friend of the podcast, Danny, sent them to us, so that's cool. And then in the Cracian Warhost, he mentioned I think 3 units that fit in there. So we got Cracian Huntsman that were mentioned, Woodsman, which I get is maybe interchangeable, but at face value 2 different units, Core Hill, and then the Cracian Chieftain, which is also just a lord type character for the faction. So in general, like I'm super happy with the amount of information that was in there. I think there's a cool narrative spin that can be done for both of these Armies of Infamy. And again, like this is always sort of my reaction, but like I'm so sold on the narratives that they're pushing for these Armies of Infamy. Like if you give me some cool rules and some cool options, like a Cracian Warhost sounds great. a cool Seaguard garrison is also something I think that could be super interesting. And looking just from the names of the units that we have and the names of the armies of infamy, it also feels like there's no cavalry focused army of infamy, which I think in general is just good because we've had a lot of those. So yeah, I'm super happy. What are your thoughts overall, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm super stoked for this. Like, High Elves were one of the armies I had back in 8th edition. So seeing all this stuff come back, like, kind of gives me that good nostalgia kick. A lot of the stuff were things I've had before too. So it's nice to see, and I really like the new characters because they very much fit with the theme and the sort of aesthetic of those older sculpts.
Yeah.
Some of the other stuff, like the Foot Knights for Bretonia and like the new characters, for me they kind of feel a little too different from those older sculpts for Bretonia, so there's a bit of a dissonance there for me. But like this new stuff for High Elves, just it looks so perfect. Like it looks like these could have been released, back when these armies originally existed. So I'm really stoked about that. And yeah, I'm just really excited for this. And again, I'm happy they're kind of moved away, at least for this Arcane Journal, to not have, at least, in speculation, not having a full on here's my cav list and then another one. Like it sounds like we're getting two sort of very distinct armies that aren't just like, hey, here's the one cav. So I'm really stoked about that.
Awesome. What are your thoughts, Ryan? Oh, did we lose Ryan again?
He super hates High Elves.
You're muted, Ryan.
Hello.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. No, I really like all of it overall. It all seems quite interesting, and I very much like the two ideas of the armies of infamy, like something that leads into Seaguard, cool, boat themed things, maybe, some other maybe mercenary interactions here.
For
So I
sure,
definitely that's where I see that being the thing. And with the war host, like looking at these unit names and things like that, like maybe another skirmishing infantry unit, some other interesting things for sure. I mean, they could still pull a weird one on us and just have like chariots in core.
White Lion
somehow.
chariots, sure.
Or like Tyrannok chariots or something. I don't know. None of it makes a whole ton of sense. But
sure.
Aren't
you're right. Like
Tyrannok
it
chariots
doesn't.
already core?
I don't know.
Well, presumably the Army of Infamy will come with like a whole new list of what's in core and specials.
Yeah, that's true.
But I guess my point is, yes, you're right. Like none of these look specifically cavalry themed. And I like that one of them is kind of like provincially themed.
Yeah.
And the other one is, that kind of like maritime theme.
Yeah.
So I think that would certainly be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the previous episode where we had Danny on, we talked about like or maybe it was with you, I forget, Andrew, there, but we talked about like potential White Lion cavalry, and even if they don't come back, but your Army of Infamy becomes the Cracian war host, then like you have a super cool modeling sort of opportunity to slap some dragon princes on White Lions and call them, and theme them to that army. So I'm super sold on these. I'm super sold.
Yeah, 100%.
So they did.
It's weird though that they
Yeah,
chose Trace, because like traditionally that province, or at least the White Lions, were like the bodyguard force for the Phoenix King. So it's like I wonder if they're gonna try to tie any of that aspect into the army itself.
Well, we know like who our two new unique characters are, and neither of them are the Phoenix King. So there's that. I think like in the context of your grand army, which would be like all of Ulthuan, your White Lions are perhaps, the sort of Varangian guard type unit for the to protect like the bodyguards for the High King. But I think when you go to their actual province, they are probably more common and they're probably used in a different way for local stuff. So
that kind of depends though with what time we are in, because Corhill in the time of 8th Ed was straight up the Phoenix King's like personal bodyguard, like the guy who was always with him.
Sure, yeah.
So are we gonna see like a younger version of him, like before he takes on that, I guess, title or job, or is this like he's still the same role right now?
I don't know. We'll see. Yeah.
He is, unless they change it, but like in the timeline that exists, he was captain of the White Lions, like as soon as Finnabar took over. So
okay,
like, in 2270 or whatever year the game is set in, he's captain of the White Lions. Whether he's the personal bodyguard to the Phoenix King or not, yet to be seen.
Yeah.
But a lot of it talks about him like being like almost like the principal lieutenant, like if the Phoenix King needs an army to go somewhere and you want to know the king's serious about it, Corill's the guy leading that army.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, he was also mentioned in the text as being like the best fighter in the faction type situation. So I'll be interested to see how that shakes out.
Weapon skill 6, strength 4.
Sucks to be Tyrion today, I guess.
He definitely was not that back in 8th. He was pretty
So that's what I heard. So I'm interested to see. Okay. Anybody want to risk a prediction on what kinds of rules or flavor we're going to see with these armies of infamy? Starting with Ryan.
The Sea Guard, honestly, I have no idea. Like, I have no idea how that's going to play out, other than obviously just being like, your core is
Sea Guard.
It's Sea Guard and like Illyrian Reavers. Like, it's going to be the
ship's
light
company.
forces.
I think sounds like a core unit.
Yeah, exactly. But like, you're just going to have less options, and then probably like a bunch of rules applied to you in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
To make that a thing. Whereas I think the War Host is going to be more similar to the Grand Army, but like if I was to call Sea Guard the light one, they're going to be the heavy one.
Yeah.
Like that's going to be your more like go out and start a brawl with someone army.
Yeah.
That's all.
Awesome. You wanna risk yourself there, Andrew, with a prediction?
I think Ryan is spot on with the Tracian faction being like, this is going to be the heavy infantry, hard hitting army. With the sea fair one, I think during the preview, the announcer gentleman had mentioned that they were also somewhat remnants of like the colonies that were on the old world at the time.
Yeah, and that are still there.
So they might, I don't know, maybe have like an expanded ability to take more mercenaries, maybe.
Yeah.
Also, with them being seafarers, we might see a lot of rehashing of Wolves of the Sea, where they might have like a bunch of reserve units to represent them, like coming on from boats and stuff later on in the game.
Sure. Yeah.
Other than that, like, no, it's kind of just I have no idea.
Fair.
I think Ship's Company are going to be a mercenary unit available to Bretonnia and Empire.
That would be badass.
That's possible. Yeah, that's possible. I mean, the you might be onto something, because they mentioned in the presentation that the sort of lore aspect to this arcane journal was that the Ishaya Vess, who's like the lead character for the Sea Guard garrison, is fighting, is like conducting a series of actions in Bretonia, targeting some beastmen that are there. So like it would make sense that there's interaction potentially with Bretonia, maybe the Empire, like an expanded mercenaries list. I think there's some cool potential there. I think the Merworm that's been talked about quite a bit fits well narratively into the Sea Guard. So it may just be like a Sea Guard only unit on the Merworm side, I think. And I would also agree with you guys. I would describe this one as sort of the lighter, more skirmishy, more down on their luck portion of the grimdark, if you want, portion of the high elf list. Like if we base ourselves anything on like what real life is like, far-flung garrisons are rarely heavy fighting forces that are tip-top efficiency and have access to all the tools. It's more of a out on the frontier, do what you can type situation. So I really like that's a different narrative take on high elves. We're always the sort of elite pristine faction in the old world. So I really like that idea. And for the war host, on this one, I still want to see some White Lion cavalry. That would be an amazing unit to have a profile for. I'd love to see, I don't remember if it was you, Andrew, or maybe it was Danny that mentioned like White Lions as like on their own as like a super improved version of hounds or whatever. I think would also be super cool in that army. On the rules, I'm not too sure yet, but definitely to me, this feels like the more elite version. So you have like the Sea Guard as like the lighter army of infamy. Then somewhere in the middle, having access to more options, you have the Grand Army, and then the War Host as your very specialized army of great weapon wielders, ready to kick some butt. So I like it. That's as much as I'm going to give you guys in terms of prediction. Let's talk about the actual models themselves. I'm going to kick off with the new Lord of Crace, or it's mentioned also as being a chieftain model. So in the Army of Infamy, personally, I really like this sculpt. I think this is maybe one of my favorite high elf sculpt, or certainly in the two new ones that we got is my favorite. This guy's got some swag for sure. He looks sick. He fits right in with the army. He looks lordly. Like I'm a big fan of this sculpt, and it's something I think I would consider painting just for the sake of it. Ryan, what are your thoughts on this guy?
Oh, he's so cool. I have no intention of having a high elf army, but I would totally paint this model.
Yeah, sick model. Yeah, Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I kind of covered that before. It's like he looks amazing. He definitely looks like a Lord level character. But the main thing for me is he fits really well with the aesthetics of those old sculpts. Like he looks perfect to fit in with those armies and not look out of place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, him and the Illyrian Reavers just makes you think like they should. I'd love to just see an updated version of these lines. Like they could do so much more now with where they are with sculpting. But yeah, agreed with you guys. Let's talk about the second named character. That's Ishaya Vess. What are your thoughts, Andrew?
I like her mostly, and maybe it's just the pose, but I feel like the shoulder pads just make her have a weird silhouette. I like the fact that she has an eye patch. She's definitely, as you said, a character who might be out on the fringes or on the frontier and doesn't have access to supplies. So she's got injuries. She's wearing it. She's lost her helmet somewhere. The fact that she's wielding a trident is just perfect for like a seafaring model. Like everything is cool on her except the shoulder pads, I think, let it down. And maybe that's just the angle of the pose we have for the picture, but yeah, she's not as cool as like the other character, I think.
Yeah. What about you, Ryan?
Yeah, she looks cool. I agree with Andrew. The shoulder pad silhouette makes her look odd, but it also might just be the angle that we're looking at her from. But like she's super dynamic. She'll definitely stand out. So.
Yeah, agreed. I think this like it reinforces what I was talking about earlier about like the narrative behind the two armies of infamy, where you had the pristine, decked out lord that's just in his pose lording it out, and then you have this lady here that looks really like she's been through some hard times with the eye patch. I like the model less than the other one for sure. I Yeah, I still like it. It's fine. I find she has some sort of I don't know, fish skin or yeah, an eel skin or whatever, a sea snake tied to her trident, which I think is I'm not super sold on, but in general I like the model, and I think more things should have tridents because they're awesome.
That might be
That
help.
that eel skin thing, I
Yeah.
think it's supposed to be like seaweed, because
Okay.
the Lothran Sea Guard from the Island of Blood kit, they all had that like on their spears or something. I
Okay.
forget.
So
They
that
all had that like thing on them. So it's cool because it ties her into that unit. But yeah, it does look weird. But it's because I think it's because those other models have that
yeah, that makes perfect
feature.
sense then. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Okay, let's move on to the resculpted Illyrian Reavers. What are your thoughts on these ones, Ryan?
I didn't know what the old ones look like, so these ones look cool.
Sure.
My only complaint is they're almost too busy to look at. Like looking at the picture, they're just kind of just a lot. But it might have just been how they were painted. But
Yeah,
like
there's a lot of colors there. Yeah, for sure.
it's spears and horses, dynamic. They're cool.
Yeah, I think it's I love this kit. I love the resculpting of it. I think they look sick. I'm happy to see some old, well, it's Island of Blood, so it's not that old, but like some Warhammer Fantasy battles kits be brought to like the modern digital sculpting age of Games Workshop. I think I look at this and like I can't help but be a little bit jealous and think, like, man, they could redo so many kits and just achieve some stellar results across the entire old world line. But like I'm super happy that these are getting redone. I get that they were sort of forced to because how the sprues were laid out in Island of Blood, but I think they're really, I like them. I think they're sick. They're a sick model. I really like the unit. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Like it's nice to see these models come back. They were some of the best in that Island of Blood kit. It's nice to see too that they got that command option now added, because I believe in Island of Blood it was just 5 like rank and
Dudes.
file
Yeah.
guys. There was no command option, so it's nice to actually have that option now. And again, these like the new models that they've added to this old kit again just fit perfectly with the aesthetic, and it's great. It's a great upgrade.
Awesome. Let's talk about the AOS reveals for the Barrow Kingdoms, i.e., models for your Vampire Counts army. Personally, I am extremely sold on these sculpts. I have a Soulblight Gravelords army for AOS, which is what I was playing before the Old World came back. So I'm all over this aesthetic. It's more of an AOS aesthetic. Like there's a departure from what the vampire counts looked like, but I'm still fine with it. I think there's some there's some derpy looking models in the vampire counts range. I know it's like a legacy army and stuff, but there's just some really cool stuff coming with this line. So I'm super happy that vampire counts players get an option, and then maybe I just put my army on square bases and then scream you all to death. Maybe that's like the next thing. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, this all looks really cool. Like the Age of Sigmar model design team is just
Nailing it.
crushing it. Like I don't I don't know what it is. Maybe it's like the new nature of Age of Sigmar, but like it's the only place I find them taking risks in design anymore, and they're just killing it.
Yeah, agreed. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
I agree. Like these models are amazing. They're perfect, I think, for Old World. And just to riff off something you just said, where you think they look like vastly different from their Warhammer Fantasy counterparts, I agree. but I think it's in a good way because Slovenia is quote unquote supposed to be like Romania, Transylvania type area in the old world. So this aesthetic like kind of fits with that. I feel in like the analog to like real life, like, you know, they're a little bit more opulent. They got like the weird curved like scimitar type swords and all the stuff on them. Like I think it fits perfectly to make them sort of like that distinct sort of Eastern European look as opposed to like Holy Roman Empire type thing, which is what the older Vampire Counts kits kind of look like. So I think this is a good departure and makes them sort of visually distinct if you use them in Warhammer the Old World.
Yeah, fair. I agree with all of that. Let's move on to some of the specifics here. Ryan, what are your thoughts on the White Lords? Well, I'm going to call them by their old world name here: the White Lords and Kings, the Black Knights, and the Graveguard.
They look awesome. Like, got a cool guy on a horse. You got undead horses with riders. They got lances and shit. It's great. And the Graveguard, the Graveguard looking, or the not Graveguard, looking at more of them might be a little fiddly to rank up. But you could, if I can do it with Warriors of Chaos, like Slaves to Darkness Warriors of Chaos, then it should be doable.
It should be doable. And then if you just want to like dial back the AOS-ness of the aesthetic, if you just take out that bat-winged helmet, which I thoroughly enjoy as a Night Lords player in other game systems, and you just give them a skeleton head, like you have a completely different look that I think fits really well in with the old world style too. Andrew, what are your thoughts on these guys?
Yeah, I love them. Like, they look perfect. Again, there might be issues ranking, like Ryan said, but they ooze character. All these models, like, even though they're just, you know, fucking undead zombie skeletons or whatever, like, they've really done justice making them look interesting and dynamic as opposed to maybe other game systems where they just kind of look very generic. This is great. And like going off what you said too about the helmets, the way the bat wings are placed on the helmets, they look super easy to just kind of clip or shave off anyway. Yep. And it would, as you said, it would just 100% change the look of these guys to maybe being a little bit more down to earth, like a little bit more
low fantasy
in reality. Yeah, low fantasy as opposed to like, again, the opulence of these models. But I think it would fit either way. Yeah. I mean, maybe do it on the foot guys because they're kind of rank and file, and leave it on the knights because they're supposed to be like more higher class.
Yep, agreed.
Skeletons.
Sure, agreed. On my end, much like you guys, I love all of these sculpts. I think they're great. But here's an interesting thought for you. So when I saw the White King, White Lord, I was, because I as I mentioned earlier, I have this army in AOS. I was like, didn't we just get a White Lord character in AOS on Skeletal Steed? And we did. So about 3 years ago, there was a White Lord, White King on Skeletal Steed that was released by Games Workshop for the AOS line. You guys can look it up while I'm talking here. And what is interesting in that sort of thing is the other existing AOS White Lord. That one is an absolute redo of the classic Vampire Counts White Lord. Like, it has the same bat-shaped helmet. Like, it looks very similar to the old White Lord. So what that leads me to think is, you know, if you guys needed any more proof that Vampire Counts were originally slated to be one of the core factions in the old world, like, to me, this is like an absolute smoking gun indicator, because they've done the same model twice for an AOS army. One time that has the old world aesthetic, and then just about 3 years later, they re-released the exact same model with an absolutely different aesthetic that is in line with the skeletons that first came out in the Cursed City box set just before the AOS Soulblight Gravelords army launched. So twice the same model, one time with the old world aesthetic, but it lands in an AOS army. And now this AOS aesthetic for I think they're called Barrow Kingdoms within the Grave Lords in a very short span of time. And GW doesn't redo random hero models like that on a 2 to 3 year basis. And while they were starting to sculpt this guy, they probably knew that they are either had just released another one or were about to release another one. So any thoughts on that last bit, guys?
It's certainly an interesting point that you raised. I hadn't thought about it too much. Sorry, I'm distracted by the premise that this skeleton is using its lungs to operate this musical instrument.
Hey, don't worry about that. Magic.
Magic, yeah. So anyways, so that was an interesting thing that sort of popped to mind when I was looking at it. Let's move on to the Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon and the Vampire Lord on Nightmare. What are your thoughts, Andrew?
The dragon is probably the single most amazing miniature I've ever seen. I love everything about this. I love the more sleek look of the zombie dragon as opposed to the old counterpart where it looks very chunky and fat. This looks like something that was alive and is now rotting away. It's just oozing character. The vampire on top with his ridiculously huge fucking lance, but just decked out in all the accoutrement of a vampire lord. This is amazing kit. And even if I don't play vampire accounts or AOS, I'm probably gonna buy this model just for the pleasure of being able to paint it and have it on my shelf because it's just fucking perfect. And if you look at his shield and you're a fan of Blood Knights, it's basically a Blood Knight logo with the red keep or whatever it's called.
Yeah, 100%.
So it's perfect.
Yeah,
you might have trouble getting it on a base though if you're playing it in Old World.
Sure.
It's huge. It looks huge.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this one, Ryan?
I echo everything Andrew said. It just looks so cool. And I always thought the old zombie dragon was cool. This one's just cooler. And it's Rider. It's it's got wind motion to it with his cape. He's got this super cool, starting to get bat-like face going on to him. He has a chalice of blood in his saddle for some reason.
Yeah, because that thing has rules in AOS. Yeah, the chalice of blood on the zombie dragon.
There you go. Yeah, just it's like spinach for Popeye. Just mid-game power boost.
Yeah, heals wounds. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
paint the Monster Energy drink logo on the side.
Yeah. I am a fucking massive fan. So the Soulblight Gravelords army that I do own was all sort of Blood Knight themed. So I am wholly on board with these. What I like here is the change in aesthetic. I know this is an old world podcast and stuff, and I'm supposed to, push the old world models here, but I think the change of aesthetic from, the cartoony villain, old school, black and white 1920s Dracula vibe for Vampire Count, to this, where the vampires look like vicious, animalistic, just fucking murder machines here. I am all for it. I'm more of a Blade fan when it comes to vampires than 1920s black and white Dracula. So I'm wholly on board with this. As you mentioned, Andrew, that zombie dragon is fantastic. I love especially the rider for me sells it. He looks like something that's actually incredibly frightening on the battlefield and is about to unleash some massive ass whooping on the enemy army, which you're never going to see because of Mortis engines are so good in Old World, but that is what it is. And then even the vampire on Nightmare is sick. There's the one with the crazy hairdo, which is whatever, but the other guy who's bald looks also super vicious and again, I guess animalistic, half in the middle of a bat transformation. So yeah, I'm super, super sold on these. yeah, I may end up picking them up just because they're incredibly cool sculpts, and I would have the rest of the army already ready, so to transfer to old. So yeah,
I always imagine them kind of like, what is it, Buffy the Vampire Slayer vampires, where like when they're normal, they just have like a normal face, but when they go to like fight mode or like feeding mode, that's when they get that sort of bestial look and their features change.
sure.
Like that's always kind of how I pictured the vampires in fantasy.
Sure. Maybe, yeah. Yeah, I definitely I can, but I'm there for Buffy. It's all good. Okay, let's move on to Beastman. So with Beastman, we have the I didn't even realize it was a named character at first. I thought it was just another Bray Shaman, but it's actually Kralmaw, the Prophet of Rune, which is going to be one of their named characters. That's all the information we got on these on Beastman so far. But I think that with the sort of timeline that they gave us after pretty much confirms. I know it was strongly suspected, but it's going to be for our last 3 books: High Elves, Beastmen, and then Wood Elves. In terms of the model itself, I like it. I like it. I don't have too much to say. I generally really like the Beastman aesthetic in general, and I may very well end up with a Beastman army depending on how this Journal of Infamy goes. You know, if there's either a Minotaur or a Centaur themed army, I am I am jumping on that train. But in general, yeah, I like the model. I don't have too much to say about it. I think it's also a cool sub in for a Great Bray Shaman on foot. Not that you see many of those, but yeah, cool model. Andrew?
Yeah, I agree. He looks really awesome. A lot of character. Again, fits in well with those older sculpts while still being like a new iteration of Beastman. Um, Again, I'm really stoked for Beastman to come out. That is kind of my planned next army, which would be like an all Minotaur force. So hopefully that's in the Arcane Journal. But even if not, I can do that with the general army to begin with.
Yeah.
But this guy would fit like in perfectly. He's got like that, like the big huge horns. Like he would look great in a Minotaur army. And I think it was Ryan on Discord who pointed out this is also in the Magic art.
It is, yeah.
Yep.
So that follows along with the other Empire Wizards that released were also pictures from the art in the Magic section. So that's kind of cool that they're bringing some of these art pieces to life as well.
Yeah, and I think, was it you, Ryan, that, or maybe it was Danny, I forget, that linked this cool art picture from the rule book, the Wood Elf caster? Like that one.
I think that was Danny. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can assume that one is showing up also at some point, and that one looks really cool too. So, yeah. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
Oh, yeah. He looks amazing. He's just super on brand. He's got his cool little buddy
Familiar.
on a tree stump. Like he's just a whole thing. He's got some interesting like lore stuff to it, tying in with the death of Morgur.
Yeah.
So it's just I'm just curious to see like how that relates to the overall story. But
yeah, for sure. Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's just cool in general. But speaking of cool, the next item that we have at the end of the show there, we can all, I think, safely assume at this point that it's Cathay because of the watermarked image that's there. So we have a first new army coming to the old world, presumably a large-scale new line for the game. Like, what are your hot takes on Cathay as a potential army, Ryan?
it could like I'm just here for more options. I didn't play Total War 3, so I honestly don't know anything about them. But like more is cool. My only question is what makes them not Chinese themed empire? But
There's a little bit more to it. Yeah, but I can talk about that after. That's fine. Cool. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
I'm excited. For one, it's gonna be cool to see another human-centric army coming to the game. Oh, and first of all, to all the naysayers, like that's 100% the fucking picture
Yeah.
from the Cathay image, and just like every one of their other fucking like timelines where they have teaser pictures like that, those pictures are indicative of what's coming after like the clearly announced shit. So like, stop denying it. It's fucking Cathay coming. But back to my original line of thinking was it's going to be cool to see another human-centric army, but one that's more steeped in like magic. So I think they're going to have a lot of similarities in terms of like High Elves, where like magic is an integral part of how their forces like operate on the field. They have a lot of like weird magical creatures and constructs that would be in that army. So it's going to be cool to see sort of that blending of like very generic human forces with these kind of like fantastical beasts and constructs. I think it's going to be a really cool army to see. And, you know, the lore section in the core rulebook has a lot of background that we've never seen before about Cathay. So this is kind of one I think fans of the game in the past have really wanted to see come to the table and just never materialized. So this is like super exciting to see like what they actually have in store for this faction. Ryan, what do you think? Or Kevin, sorry, what do you think?
All good. Yeah, sure. Quite a few thoughts on this one. So firstly, like you guys, I'm super sold on just having new options for the game. Like, I'm really excited to see the studio sculpt an entirely new line that is, up to the standards of what GW could produce in 2025. I think we're going to get probably all floored by sort of what's coming up in the old world at that point. So I'm super happy on that front. I'm personally not always, but I'm not super interested in like the ancient China aesthetic as a thing in general, but cool, like whatever. I know like this is super popular with a massive section of people who are into this hobby. So like a bunch of high fives to you guys. I couldn't be happier for you. I think interestingly, like GW has already developed a ton of artwork, has done a lot of lore development and rules for Creative Assembly, the company that makes the Total War games. And quite famously, they said that they had developed an 8th edition army book for Grand Cathay to sort of inspire the game designer team at Creative Assembly when creating the game. So I would think that in general, since GW tends to, or the SDS tends to take quite heavily on previous editions of the game for what they put as like at least the flavor and the mechanics of the factions in Old World, there'll be some translation to that. And I could talk about that a little bit later there, but like Ryan, you mentioned like you weren't super familiar with the faction. Like, I guess for me, if you take like Romance of the Three Kingdoms style Chinese literature or culture, or maybe even like Dynasty Warriors, and it has a baby with Warhammer, that's basically what you get as like Cathay as that baby. Like, it's in terms of its rules identity in the computer game, which, as I was saying, like is inspired by an army book that was developed by GW. I think their big shtick is they have this sort of feng shui yin and yang situation going on, where you have ranged units generally in the army that are, I forget which one they're, let's call them yin, and then you have melee units that are yang, and then they give buffs to each other if they're within a certain amount of range of units of the opposing, of that dichotomy. So I think,
okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
Ryan.
that all sounds quite interesting.
Yeah. So I think that's something that translates super well to the old world in terms of making like some combined arms forces where, you need to keep some ranged units or bring ranged units or close combat units to buff the other portion of your army. Like, that's super interesting design space that would really sell well, I think, in the old world for sure. And then on the other hand, when you think of like the visual identity or the unit identity to that faction in Total War, I think like there's 3 things that sort of stand out to me, or maybe 4 there, but 3 things that stand out to me if you say like what's on their unit roster. So it's dragons, like Eastern dragons, like the Chinese New Year type dragons that you've seen everywhere, I'm sure. And they have like casters that could transform into dragons that will and transform back to casters after, a bit like that Morathi situation from AOS. So I'm sure everybody will be very happy to see more dragons in the game. But that's definitely coming. I think also of the massive Terracotta giants that look a little bit like bone giants from Tomb Kings in terms of like their overall build, but they're like terracotta. They're called Sentinels, which I think are like key to the aesthetic of that army and a big like tough monster character, not character, sorry, unit in the old world. And then the third thing is they're called Longma Riders in Total War, and they're essentially Peg Knights, but like instead of having knights like Western European style knights on them, you have these sort of red Pegasus, and they're like, and you have like imperial palace of ancient China type guards riding them. So what I'm basically saying is dragons, big monsters, and Peg Knights. So I'm sure everybody at home is really happy that thing's gonna show up. And then the fourth sort of element I think that is key to that faction in Total War is, beyond all the magic and the engineering stuff that Andrew hinted at, I think is like there's also a big push for like hot air balloons in that army, and like they look like the Chinese. I probably, if we have a Chinese listener to this podcast, they're going to be super insulted with all the wrong cultural references I've made over the last 5 minutes, but they look like the sort of the little candles that float there. Is it Chinese New Year type candles, balloons there, and they sort of fly around and fire guns. So there's like there's a lot of, I think, units that are different from what the Empire is bringing to the table and are super cool. Like there's Jade Lion constructs. Like there's just cool stuff in general that I'd love to see realized in 2025 GW sculpting. Sorry, that was super long winded, but yeah.
No,
And then
good.
yeah, and then their lore shtick is sorry, just a last thing that came to mind. Their big lore stick is like the Great Wall of not China. They have this big bastion that goes all around the northern side of Cathay, and that is basically they're just on permanent defense mode, protecting against like invasions from the Warriors of Chaos and other Chaos aligned factions coming from the north of the world. So definitely, I think, like, I'm projecting and speculating like crazy here, but an army of infamy stationed around, the garrison of the Great Wall, or the Great Bastion, as it's called in Cathay, is like, I think, is a bit of a given on that one. And then maybe as another army of infamy, because I'm on a fucking roll here, is like something around the Silk Road and the merchant caravans, because it's a big mechanic of that faction in Total War that bring like all these weird and wonderful goods to the Empire and the old world along the most terrible trading route you can imagine in the universe. But yeah, so that was, any thoughts on that, guys? I went on for a super long bit there.
I mean, that would be all cool if true. Right now, it's all, we have no idea what to expect, but I think.
Oh yeah.
I think the video game is a good point of reference on like kind of how we should expect the game to be. So, there's a lot of potential here for a really awesome and uniquely old world faction to be coming out. So I'm here for it.
Awesome. Okay, now we got another bit of leak, rumor, let's call it leak or rumor situation going on. So, the question is, could the Dogs of War be coming back to the old world? So, if you guys haven't seen it, you can look it up on Reddit. There was a situation over the last few days where somebody, presumably on the GW side, was updating the interactive map of the old world that exists on the website, the Warcom website, or is accessible through the website. And that image glitched out, and somebody somehow took a screenshot of it. And what has changed is that a number of city-states, a number of cities in Estalia have had like faction logos added to them. So Bilbali is one, Avila is another. and I can't quite Overreino or
Henry.
something. Yeah, another third Spanish sounding name for not Spain in the old world. So, obviously Estalia and probably a little bit more Tilea, but Estalia is tied to the Dogs of War faction in the old world setting. So, that opens the door. Could that faction be coming back? I would love to see Dogs of War come back. I looked at their army book for 6th edition a little bit. I think it would need to be updated significantly to fit into the old world, though, because that army list has like 3 unique units and then just profiles. Like it's kind of a strange one. So there's like a pikemen, which super cool, crossbowmen, and something called duelists as like unique units to that faction, and then they have like dwarfs, ogres, heavy cavalry, light cavalry as just like the standard stat line for those things as options, which is kind of like, I think they would need to be given a little bit more flavor to be brought back into the game. So like, I don't know, mercenary Chilean ogres as rather than just like ogre. But and then obviously the secret sauce to that army was like the 6 million different regiments of renown, which I assume they're not going to all come back at once, but who knows? So if that army is a thing again, I'd be super excited for it. I would love some Renaissance era, mercenary companies running around, or a Chilean faction or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, Ryan?
So I have kind of 2 thoughts about the map thing, then I'll go into the rest of it. But so for those not super familiar with the map, the reason this is notable is that only things that have gotten their arcane journal so far have had interactable icons on the map for any level of granularity less than the overall faction.
Yeah.
So like when the game started, little things went up for the various Bretonian dukedoms and whatnot. And then when like orcs came out, some new ones went up. When dwarfs came out, new ones went up, etc. So having interactable things for a complete random non-extant faction is interesting.
Yeah.
The counter argument to that is, if I had built this map, I would have built in everything that was ultimately expected to be on the map and then just used layers to hide the rest of it. And it very easily could have not been telegraphing anyone, and someone just like clicked a button wrong.
Sure.
So
Sure, but I mean, if you said ultimately,
oh yeah,
we're
like I
expected
guess
to
what
come
I'm saying
back.
is it's not indicative of proximity in time necessarily.
No, agreed, wholly agreed.
Yeah. So to the remaining portion, Dogs of War would be very interesting. And again, like I don't think we're anywhere near them releasing enough stuff to do it justice as a standalone army. But I could totally see, because this ties in with Cathay too, but like I don't expect them to drop giant Cathay army like the size of the High Elf release from
Yeah,
nothing,
impossible.
6 to 8 months from now.
Yeah.
What I could totally see is um, a campaign book coming out, like the first campaign book of the old world, and it having a Cathay army of infamy / grand army, like just a single Cathay army with a limited selection of things, probably oriented around your Silk Road army description.
Yeah.
And a Dogs of War army of some kind as the 2 things that are put in it. I'm just really torn on whether Dogs of War at this instance would work better as just a bunch of mercenaries that like everyone kind of gets access to, or some kind of weird army that is like just cobbled together from unit options from all over the place,
Yeah.
along with reintroducing some of the regiments of renown and whatnot to it.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what I see happening, is like a splat book with some new missions, a campaign, some linked story stuff, and in the Border Princes, Silk Road caravans and Estelian mercenary companies high fives.
Sure. Yeah, sure. No, I mean, that's one way of doing it. I think like you are 100% correct. There's no way that they're releasing, I don't know how many kits are coming with the High Elves, like 30 kits or whatever at the get-go of a new faction. So probably like we have a perfect example. Emperor's Children are coming for 40K and they have like what, 8 kits maybe. So I think you're looking at a similar kind of release. But it's like it's been done by the specialist studio elsewhere, like Solar Exilia, for instance, or the Mechanicum for 30K. Like entirely, well, Mechanicum's not an entirely new line, but Solar
But like
Exilia certainly
Solar
is.
Auxilia came out with 5 kits.
Yeah, but maybe it starts with 5 or 6 kits, right?
Yeah.
You get a few dual build options in there. You get a pair of characters and like a cavalry unit that's dual build. Like you could do something with a few kits.
Oh yeah, but I guess what I'm getting at is like the army list will be constrained by what models they make.
100%, 100%. But yeah, and I think it's gonna. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that would buy into that aesthetic though, both for Cathay and Dogs of War, like whatever it shows
Absolutely.
up as. Yeah, Andrew, what are your thoughts? Sorry, on Dogs of War.
It's a hard one for me. Like, I guess this potentially has merit that they're coming back. I was strictly 8th ed though, and Dogs of War were pretty much out at that point, so
Shit
I
canned,
don't
yeah.
know a super lot about this faction or what it would look like on the table, other than I do know they had like some unique units, like you mentioned, pikemen and stuff. I mean, more factions for the old world would be amazing. But other than a little bit of research after you sent the show notes, I don't know much about this whole rumor to begin with. Other like Ryan is like my biggest source now, and he just said it 5 minutes ago. So I don't know. Like, I guess it holds some merit, but at the same time, like this might just be, like Ryan said, like a layering issue, and maybe it's something they have preliminary work done on in the pipeline, because like we also know that Kislev is probably, like, the list at least is probably done, if not some new models made, and they're just not releasing it yet.
100%.
And they probably have a lot of things and ideas like this, like half done and half worked on, that exist, on their computers and stuff in the SDS studio. So I don't know what to think of this rumor. It'd be cool if it means they're coming out, but I'm not super invested or sure what to think of it at this point in time.
Yeah, I don't think it's anything in the short term, but like I'm super interested to see where this goes. And since you opened the door to Kislev, like there is as much work, or at least at some point in time, there was perhaps even more work done on Kislev than Grand Cathay. Like everything I mentioned earlier about an army book being designed for the creative assembly team is also the case for Kislev. And you can go right now on Warhammer Community and search Kislev, and you will find articles posted 5 years ago that show you some of the unit renders that have been done, or sorry, the artwork that have been done by GW for I think they're called Ice Guard of Kislev, is like a specific unit in Total War, looking at some discussion about what Kislev is all about. They had mapped out its icons on the old world map and stuff like that. So it's something they were working on at least 5 years ago. And I mean, they didn't show it to us day one of their work. So it's something that they've been working on presumably or actually we know for more than half a decade at this point. That's probably stopped for a while, but regardless, there's a lot of work done on that faction too. So, the scope of the project has grown. There's a new faction coming. There's this hint at something related to Dogs of War in the future, and then so I think it's a pretty safe bet that Kislev is going to pop up at some point in the coming years too, and that's a faction I'm super interested in. So, yeah. Anyway, sorry, I went on a big diatribe there again, Andrew. Okay, I think we've covered more than enough stuff now. So let's wrap this up. So thank you to our listeners for sticking around with us for the 2.5 hours or whatever it was. It was an enjoyable episode for me. Super happy to see all these reveals, new factions coming. Like, I am beyond excited. It's all good. In terms of stuff to shout out, so if you're a listener within reasonable distance of Ottawa, let's take a look at the Canhammer team tournament. Put a team together with your best buddies and come and fight us in Ottawa in May 2025. That's my shout out. Or at least fight me. The two other guys will be running the tournament. But yeah, any shout outs on your end, Ryan?
Yeah, I was just going to bring up kind of the list of regional events occurring around here. So
Sure.
February 7th to 9th, you've got Grand Clash in kind of the middle of southern Quebec.
Yeah.
So they've got a doubles tournament, a grand tournament, and a narrative event. A doubles on Friday, grand tournament, narrative event are occurring concurrently on Saturday, Sunday. February 22nd, there's a tournament at SB&T Comics, or SBT Comics and Games in Kingston. March 16th, there's a tournament at Nexus in Kingston. May 23rd is May 2 to 3 is the Canhammer Team Tournament. And then there may possibly be another grand tournament-sized event later in May. However, its date and location are TBD, so I'm just gonna leave that off right now.
Yeah, and that's here in Ottawa. Yeah, and then
unless it's in Montreal, yes.
Sure. And then we may have there's been talk of potentially a GT also in Toronto, run by the Square-based crew around Easter, Warhammer the Resurrection. So that may be a thing too. So a lot of events coming. Things are picking up again. So that's super good. Okay, cool. Anything you want to shout out, Andrew?
No, you guys covered all of it. So
perfect. All right. Thank you, listeners, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks.